Good afternoon, my name is Jenna and I'm a freshman in this year's EPIIC Colloquium. Today is a great privilege for me to introduce Andersen, the current Vice President of the Middle East and North Africa region, and the previous Vice President of Sustainable Development for the World Bank. Ms. Andersen served a fruitful 12 years in the United Nations before working for the World Bank, including the UNDP, and the Drought and Desertification Office after receiving her master's in Development Economics and African Politics at the University of London. Ms. Andersen has served the World Bank in a multitude of ways, leading bank efforts to provide sectorial leadership in her areas of expertise, including agriculture, water, environment, climate change, and infrastructure. She has worked on water sharing issues throughout her career, and she has extensive country knowledge and expertise to share with us today. It is my honor to present Ms. Andersen with the Dr. Jean Mayer Award on behalf of the Institute and my EPIIC class, in recognition of your expert leadership in forging unique collaborations to redress poverty and for promoting sustainable and innovative strategic development in the Middle East and North Africa region.
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's a great honor for me to be here today, and especially to receive this wonderful rotating award, the Dr. Jean Mayer Global Citizens Award. I also really want to thank the President, Monaco, as well as Mr. Benditson, and of course Mr. Sherman Tashman, and everyone who's here today, and the incredible students who have arranged this forum here. It's just amazing whom you have managed to bring together, and I'm deeply impressed with the program. I wish I could have been here all week. I would have had a blast. But many, many thanks for this honor. I think since I started in the work of development, I've often asked myself, so what can I do to make a difference? What is it that I should do and we can do to reach the very poorest? What is it that our service has to be to lift those in poverty? What is it that we can do to reach those who are marginalized? And I think in this spirit, getting this award is particularly meaningful because clearly Dr. Mayer was a source of great inspiration to many, not least this university, but also to all the work that he did on nutrition, health, and world hunger. And so I'm very, very inspired by this, and getting this particular award is obviously a very, very humbling thing, I would say, in the memory of such a scholar. Now, I flew in yesterday from Tunisia, and I come to you with a promise, because I left Tunisia with a very, very great sense of what's possible. And I want to convey this to you because right now there's much to be worried about in this region. But in Tunisia, I met with young people and I met with parliamentarians, I met with the president, I met with the prime minister and the cabinet. And I have to tell you that there is a pride, there is a hope, there is an optimism that finding together a way forward in a constitution that safeguards individual rights, a constitution that safeguards women's rights, a constitution that's forward-looking, even including things such as climate change, decentralization, enshrined in the constitution. I met with the young people who felt that they had risked it all, but they had also gained it. They had worked hard, but it was delivered. And I met with women who had been an incredible force in forging this constitution. And so, whether in the streets, in their CSOs, in their activisms, or in parliament. And so yes, things are tough in some countries and things are not easy, but let us not forget where traction is made and where forward steps are made. Because in Tunisia, it is all about anchoring pluralism. It is all about finding a way that this transformation can be irreversible, that this revolution gets roots so that it cannot be uprooted, if you like. And it is about ending extreme poverty. It is about boosting shared prosperity. These are the goals of the World Bank, and these are very much also what we see in Tunisia being prioritized. Boosting shared prosperity and ending poverty through driving jobs, driving growth, driving inclusion, and yes, driving better governance and anti-corruption. And so it's also about finding a way in today's Tunisia where they have managed to find convergence, hard fought for compromises, I would say, on a constitution. Finding that convergence, finding that consensus, using that consensus and convergence now to drive an economic agenda that can be successful for the country, and I'll get back to that. So I know that in these last few days, much has been discussed here, and there will have been a concern around the MENA region. There will have been a concern about the future, and rightly so. But I don't want us to forget the inspiration and the hope and the opportunity and the possibility that this region also have. But I do recognize that fragility runs through the region and runs through the region in many ways. And I know that this would have been discussed, as I mentioned. People asking me, so is the Arab Spring shattered? Are the hopes for those who called for change in the Arab street, the voice and accountability that they sought for, have they been shattered by war, by conflict, by disagreements between political and economic and interests? And are the vulnerabilities in the Middle East then escalating to a point of no return? These are the questions that are faced often, and we do see absolutely unbelievable horrors and tragic events in Syria, with the spillover that this is causing to the neighboring countries of Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. So these are real issues that cannot be underestimated. And we do see fragility, not to mention conflict, and how that is hampering economic growth and opportunity. But at the same time, we can also say, of course, that the very causes for the Arab Spring, the discontent, the inequalities, the lack of transparency has not yet been resolved either. So yes, there is a to-do list, and yes, there is, in a sense, an existential crisis where the issues around identity remain yet to be fully answered. But I come to you with 3 messages and 3 examples. And I'd like to give these 3 messages because I think each of these messages underline some of the important elements that I think we need to have with us in the bag as we journey with the people of the Middle East through this transition. And first is a very simple one. And in fact, we probably all know it, but we tend to forget it in our spirit of optimism and hope. Because the story is this: revolutions and transformational change take time. There are some forward steps and there are some backward steps. And in MENA region, that's no different. And I invite you to take a look to Eastern Europe, where 20 years ago the Soviet Union fell apart. And I invite you to look at the news headlines of today. These are transitions that take time, and those who felt that we could flick a switch and instantly institutions were established, and instantly power struggles would go away, and instantly people would trust the democratic ballot box, and instantly the economy would get it right. I'm afraid that we may have been a little naive in our optimism of the moment. And so that's the first point that I want to make. It takes time, but yet I invite you, as I mentioned, to look at Tunisia, or even at Morocco, where, yep, there are issues, but look at the progressive, slow shifts towards greater inclusion and voice. Or look at Yemen, a country that is brought by centrifugal powers that would tear it apart. And yet that's a country that managed to establish a national dialogue with a very inclusive process that came up with the very basic principles only a couple of weeks ago upon which the constitution will be based. And so yes, while this terrible tragedy is playing out in Syria, with unimaginable horror associated with it, and yes, while there are still uncertainties in the region, there are many countries, in fact, nearly all countries, where there is a sense that that spirit of freedom has been released and that they cannot return to the bad old days. That spirit of freedom has been released in the hearts and the minds of many. And you see it on Twitter, and you see it on Facebook, and you hear it on the radio, and you see it on YouTube, and it is there. And I hear it when I speak to the young people, whether in Saudi Arabia, or whether in Libya, or whether in Yemen. It is something that is tangible, and you sense it. And so it would be impossible, as I said, to stamp it out. So I see a region transformed. I see a people released. I see an optimism for the possible. Not that they have arrived there yet, but an optimism for the possible, for opportunities for the future. And I see this especially amongst the young. The young who have started this and in a sense risked it all, and some paid the ultimate price. But the young who believe in a tomorrow and who have an imagination, a fearlessness, a power, and a sense of the possible. So that's my first message. Revolutions take time, but don't give up hope, and have a sense of the time dimensions. The second message that I would pass to you is, well, political awakening. I think we can give it a check mark. Yep, political awakening, check. The question is around economic awakening. And in a sense, there is this conversation across the Middle East that let's first fix the political, and then when we fix that, we'll get to the economic. And I think that that's a point in case that where maybe there's been some missteps. We all watched on our TV screens, and I'm sure some of you were were on the squares when we heard the shouts of الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام. We heard it. We heard again, إرهاب. These were the political messages that we heard, and we understood, bring down the regime, leave. The conversation around the economy obviously didn't take place in the heat of that moment. It's normal, it's understood, and it really does in revolutions. And yet, all that energy, all the hands painted, the faces painted, the shoes held up, that symbolism, which was amazing, constructive, irrepressible, communicated with such passion. It's that passion we need to tap into now to begin to have a conversation around the economics. Because so far, the region has not been able to deliver on the promise of the revolutions. So far, obviously, jobs have not been delivered. And I want you to know this is not a failure of the Arab Spring. We looked at over 100 transitions. 100 transitions that happens with an abrupt transition. And it should come as no surprise that in each and every one of them did growth slump. It's normal, think of it. Would you invest your pension fund in a country that is going through uncertainty? No. So each of them, jobs go down. And in each of them, there is a sense of the private sector holding back, of entrepreneurship holding back, and therefore jobs going down. So it is not surprising. Of course, this happened at the same time as the Eurozone crisis, and so Europeans were also buying less and traveling less, etc. So that's well understood. But we argue today in the sense that the region is facing not one, but two economic crises. The first crisis is the original crisis, the original distortions that generated jobless growth, the cronyism, the difficulty for the outsiders to become the insiders, etc. So, and the poor service delivery that we saw across the region. But this is compounded by the crisis of the abrupt change and coupled with the Eurozone crisis, the lower investments that happened domestically. And so and in some countries, adding on to the public sector jobs and thereby having a greater fiscal deficit. And so, while we're not recommending to do abrupt economic reforms because that could be critical to the stability of the social contract, we do recognize that there are very, very large expectations from the people that feel they risked it all and now they need to see the payback. And so our advice is really, look, identify the low-hanging fruit. Look at what is doable. Can you simplify the investment climate so that if I'm a young entrepreneur, can get a loan, start a business, hire people, and God forbid, if I hire 5 and I only needed 4, I can fire 1 without having to go to court? Can I maybe easily export my products? Simplify the business climate. Some of these things that have no political cost, except they may have cost, but they have no economic cost in the budget. This has been not that easy to get some of these reforms through because there are rentier interests. There are those who are sort of on the inside of that common economy who don't necessarily want outsiders to come in and participate. But that's one of the areas. Obviously, open up opportunities so everyone can participate. And this could have urgent impacts. Expectations are high. But I have to say that when we are working in each of these countries, and I mentioned Tunisia, Libya, and Yemen as being good examples, here we are really encouraging a twofold conversation. One, the conversation and national dialogue. I was just in Tunisia. I said to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, tell the people the truth. Every family knows how much you earn and how much you spend. This is not, treat the people as adults. Don't promise them things you can't deliver for easy, cheap elections. Tell the people the truth so you can have an honest conversations about the trade-offs that you want to make, like any family has. That's the first point. Have an economic discussion with the people of Tunisia or the people of whatever country and have an honest dialogue. And two, deal with what you can now that can deliver reforms. Business climate, bank loans for small entrepreneurs, simplifying the red tape, if you like, dealing with governance and corruption, things that can only bring greater trust. Publish what you earn, shine a light on the government budget so that people can see that the resources, where they're going and that they're not going to corruption. Bring about greater trust between the government and its people. So that's my second message. Political awakening, check. Economic awakening is still on the to-do list. Let's move that one forward. My third message deals with, yeah, that's good. Economic awakening alone, however, is not enough. We've got to deal with the broader issues around governance and the political economy of reform. That matters just as much. So in the MENA region, I found that our institution, we are sailing very close to the political wind. And at times, I'm sure some of my fellow world bankers have been very uncomfortable about this. When I arrived in the MENA region in 2011, in the midst of the Arab Spring, I found that more than ever before, the political and the economic appeared to be two sides of the same coin. We asked ourselves which actions and reforms we can support and encourage so that broad-based and inclusive government can come about, and so that government and benefits can reach the very poorest. And we found that the answer lay outside what you would expect us to be talking about. The answer lay in this business of holding the government accountable. Holding the government accountable to the people. Creating a new set of rights. Rights that I have as a citizen. And make those irrevocable. Make them enshrined in law. And so, for example, in Tunisia, we released direct budget transfers into the budgets against 5 freedoms. This has never been done before. And what were the freedoms? I mean, so laws that were passed to enshrine freedoms? Well, the freedom of information law, the rights to assemble law, the right to form political parties, scorecards for service-oriented ministries, and a public procurement law to curb corruption. Now clearly you would ask, so what does all this freedom stuff have to do with economic performance? It has everything to do with economic performance. Think of this. If I see as an investor, if I see as a young person, or if I see as a taxpayer, that all of a sudden there's stability and the trust between government and governed is growing, well then obviously investment climate is go up. I will be less likely to cheat on my taxes. I'll be more likely to go on holiday. I'll be more likely to spend my money, and the economy can begin to get rolling again. So these were the kind of issues we discussed. And so to get more inclusive growth, we felt that we had to not only do these freedoms, but then, as I mentioned, boost the investment climate. And again, it is all about anchoring that pluralism. Anchoring pluralism can be a phenomenal factor for economic growth. So that's my third message. Yep, by all means economic awakening, but don't forget governance. Governance matters. Governance matters at any country, in any time. These were my 3 messages. Allow me to give you 3 examples of what we do. And I thought about what I should tell you, and I thought, I'm not going to speak about what you expect me to say. I'm not going to talk about building bridges and highways. We do that too. I'm not talking about potable waters and girls going to school. We do that too. I'm not going to talk about microfinance. We do that too. I'm not going to talk about infrastructure. We do that too. You know that. This is what you hear. This is what people have conversations about. Is it right? Is it wrong? Do it right? That's fine. We can have that conversation. But I thought that I would talk about something you don't know that we do, because that could be intriguing and interesting. And so one thing I thought that I would mention is just recently, we had the opportunity, and I have the great honor to be engaged in that, of signing a landmark water agreement between the Israelis, the Jordanians, and the Palestinians. We signed it on a snowy day in December of last year. I'll get to that, but during my professional career, and it was mentioned in the introduction, I've often sort of found myself working in multi-country negotiations over land, over water, over rights, over environmental issues. And I started out actually at the UN with the multilateral peace talks 20 years ago, I suppose. And so that has been part and parcel of what I've been working on. But since that time, I worked on the Red Sea, environmental and marine navigation agreements, which obviously involved a lot of countries, as you can imagine, some of which were not particularly speaking to each other. Niger Basin Agreement, Senegal Basin Agreement, Lake Chad, Nile, and other agreements. But anyway, here, and of course, in biodiversity talks, climate talks, etc. But here, if I take away some of the lessons from this, is I have found that success in driving, again, convergence, compromise, lies with patience, lies with listening, also for what is not being said. And then this long process of building trust. And always seeking to identify the areas of convergence, even when consensus cannot be reached. That each step in the direction of convergence can be counted later, without people even knowing it, as a step towards consensus. And so on that snowy day in December of last year, I maybe felt a little bit like Gene Meyer when he made a scientific discovery. I don't know. But it was a massive breakthrough. Because for more than 10 years, for more than a decade, we have been quietly behind the scenes negotiating this. And I can tell you that it was precisely about trust. It was precisely about building up the level of confidence between the three parties, when the political rhetoric was often very, very difficult. We were able to continue steady moving forward over these 10 years. And it required perseverance, and it required patience, and at one point nerves of steel. We had mega press outside, and there was a hitch in one particular bit of the language, and frantic calls were made back to three capitals to get instructions, and we could hear the press. We were standing just outside, and there was beginning to get some rumbling, what's happening. Anyway, we let them sit for about half an hour, the press, and then finally we came out, and all was well, and we were able to sign the agreement in front of the world press. But one of the aspects then that this agreement does, and I'm not going to go into the detail, deals with new water, not old water, so it doesn't prejudice Oslo and final status talks, but it shows that the World Bank can use its convening power not to enforce something on others, but to offer up a platform for compromise and for sustained engagement over a 10-year period to drive some level of agreement that is a win-win for all. So that was one example. I thought that would be a little bit surprising to you, because this is probably not what you know most about with respect to what the World Bank does. But I also thought that I would mention a little bit a second example that deals with building resilience and responding to the Syria crisis. And I know that yesterday you had a session that went straight to the heart and also to the horror of what's happening in Syria and the surrounding countries. So obviously we salute our UN and CSO friends who are working hard inside Syria to alleviate as much as they can the pain that is caused, and whilst we know that is not enough, we do salute them. We do not work in Syria, that is not what we do. So we thought, what can we do to put our shoulder to the wheel? And we felt that in the countries, the surrounding countries, we could step up. Because here is really very, very impactful on the Jordanian and the Lebanese and the other countries' economy. You have probably registered and unregistered around 2 million refugees out of a 4.5 million population in Lebanon, and probably around 1 million or so in Jordan. In Jordan, 70% of the refugees live outside the camps, live in communities, living in the same communities as do the Jordanians, pushing on pressure on municipal services, pushing pressure obviously on schools, on hospitals, etc. In Lebanon, 100% of the people live in no camps. So then, how to support communities where it's very real? I met the governor of Mafraq, or the mayor of Mafraq, the city up north in Jordan, near the Zatri refugee camps, those of you who know it. And he said, I used to collect 200 tons of garbage a day, now I collect 600, but I only have 2 trucks. It's this level of detail that matter. So people talk about rents being pushed up, salaries being pushed down. So we thought, let's see what we can do. We pulled together grant-based $60 million to support the municipalities where the refugee pressure is the highest, so that they can create greater resilience through community service, public services. And tomorrow, I think, I'm flying to Paris, where President Hollande of France and President Suleiman of Lebanon, and actually John Kerry and the P5, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, foreign ministers, maybe 1 or 2 will be missing, will be there to exactly try to do the same thing for Lebanon. And we will push exactly for the resilience approach in Lebanon. This is critical at this time, and so, yeah, these are not World Bank loans. No, we are going out with a hat, so to speak, and seek to mobilize the resources, but we are able to do so. We're able to underwrite donors' concerns about fiduciary integrity, greed, corruption of these resources, and that's what we are going to do for Lebanon, as well as what we have done for Jordan, so that these communities do not end up, frankly, fracturing with host versus guest, if you like, amongst the community. And so that's another thing that we do, and one that I feel passionate about, because it's absolutely critical for these countries to keep their borders open to the horrors from which people, so that the people who are fleeing from the horrors of Syria can find a safe haven. And the last sort of example I wanted to give deals with how to facilitate state building through local government and through civic participation. Many of you will come from countries where you take it for given that your trash is picked up, there's water in your taps, you maybe go and vote for your local elections, you take it for given. But the Arab Spring, in a sense, gave place to voice, and also talked about inclusion. And here I think this European principle of subsidiarity, delegating downwards to the lowest appropriate level where services can be provided, is very, very relevant. In the centralized state, services were managed from the center. But you can imagine if you sit in Alaska and every decision has to be decided in Washington, what kind of inefficiencies that would deliver in the system. And that's what I'm talking about. So what does it look like when you delegate downwards? You begin to figure out, well, do we really need to have the center decide on this? Actually, no. Can we not empower the mayors to do that? Collect the garbage, deal with the schools, deal with the services that every citizen expects? Actually, yes. And in doing so, not only do you greater efficiency inside the government bureaucracy, but you also drive a sense of much greater trust between the citizen and his or her government. Because when do I meet the government? When do I really meet the government? I meet it when my garbage is picked up. I meet the government when I drop off my daughter at school and know that she will be safe, there will be toilets at the school, and she will be taught by teachers who are qualified and textbooks will be there. That's where I meet my government. And so if we're able to deal with service delivery and empower the municipal level, then that is also where these new constitutions can actually give life to what people had hoped for and to what people expect. And it can also help reduce the disparity between the regions. In many countries, that was part of the discontent and the cause of these revolutions. So in Tunisia, I arrived yesterday, as I said, from Tunisia. I met with 25 mayors precisely on this conversation. I was previously in Sana'a in Yemen, same conversation. This is what people want to have happen. And so this is very important, and one where we are certainly putting in both technical expertise as well as financing. But it's challenging to us and challenging to traditional donors. Much more simple to deal with a minister of X than to deal with 200 municipalities of Y. But this is where we have to get nimble and get smart so we can support them. So, to conclude, I've given you three messages and 3 examples of things I think you didn't necessarily know that we work on. The example of the border agreement between 3 parties that are not necessarily always seen as signing agreements. The example of what we're doing for resilience in the Syria context, and the example of decentralizing and moving power from the center to the local. And so, when I look at the journey that I have personally myself taken, and what I have learned through this journey, and when I look at the journey that I have had the privilege of traveling in the last 3 years following the Arab Spring, and what it has taught me, I think the lesson that I can give is both simple and humble and quite modest. But it's really all about people. It's all about connecting with people. And we all basically want the same thing. What we want is a better life, security, a job for ourselves, and security for food on the table, security for our families, freedom of thought, and an accountable government that treats us with dignity. We want to be heard and we want to be respected. It's very basic. That's what people want. And so we at the World Bank, we may have many smart publications, and we may have neat website, and we may jet set around the world, and we may speak with important people who make important decisions, but we must never let that fool us into thinking that we are more important, let alone wiser, than the people that we serve. We are development workers, that's all we are. And our job is to serve, that's all it is. And we need to respect the client. We need to listen, we need to dialogue. We need to offer up lessons that we have learned from elsewhere. And we need to offer up conclusions that we've seen in other countries. We need to communicate what we know and what we don't know. We need to supply information, data and analysis, and yes, recommendations, of course. But at the end of the day, all we can do is to facilitate, we can moderate, we can create a neutral space, but at the end of the day, the only lasting solution are those owned by the people we serve. And so 3 years after the Arab Spring and the political transitions to a more open and just and inclusive Arab world, that is still a work in progress. Uncertainties certainly persist. But I have faith. I have faith in the region. I have faith in the people, especially the young. Optimism must not give way, because all the people who march for freedom, they still believe. And they were willing to sacrifice it all, and some indeed did. Sacrifice with the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate price. And so it is for the rest of us in this world to show steadfast commitment to assist the people of the region. From our place, with our convening power and knowledge and finance that we have, we will do our utmost to respond as best we know to this challenge. Because we all need to respond to the audacity of the people that they showed the world. Because we need to make sure that those brave men and women who marched did not march in vain. And it's for this reason that I'm particularly pleased, President and everyone else here, especially, of course, Mr. Tishman, who has done a fantastic job in arranging this. I'm particularly pleased to be here because I see so many people, so many young faces, so interested in this region. I encourage you to stay with this region, to contribute to it and to contribute so that we can collectively step up and invest our ideas, our resources, and the energy that this region so richly deserves. This is how we can best honor the legacy of Dr. Jean Mayer. I thank you.
We now have time for a couple questions.
Okay, my name is Ibrahim Wardi. I teach here at the Fletcher School a number of courses on Middle Eastern politics and economics. And let me start by saying that I agree with everything you said, and I think that the World Bank in general does a much better job than its sister organizations. If you were here earlier, you probably heard my criticisms of the IMF. And in that, I fully agree with your former chief economist, Joseph Stiglitz, in terms of his take on things. Now, I want to be a bit more specific and mention a personal experience I've had with the world of development in the wake of the Arab Spring. So, I know that nobody knows about the Deauville Partnership, so I'm going to say a word about it. It's a very ambitious plan of involving some $80 billion to help the Arab Spring countries succeed in their transition. And so one day I got a message from one of the smaller development banks, a regional one, saying, we know your work and we know that you tend to have a critical approach to development in general. Could you write us a policy paper and could you suggest a topic? So I wrote a paper titled Making the Deauville Partnership Work. In other words, trying to make things differently than before. And to make a very long story very short, shortly before I submitted my paper, I talked to them on the phone to tell them what my report was going to be about. And I said that I suggest a number of inclusive solutions. Many of them involve Islamic banking ideas, since, and here I should also say that the World Bank has pioneered, again, the implementation of Islamic finance by creating a specialized unit in Istanbul dealing with that. But their reaction was, it was a European person at that regional bank who told me, oh no, don't mention Islamic finance, we know nothing about it. Literally. And my reaction was, well, maybe you ought to learn something about it, because it so happens that Arab Spring countries are essentially Muslim countries. So you should know the culture and the expectations, etc. So here's my question. So having said all this, I think that one of the big flaws of the development world is they tend to be overly abstract in their view of things and overly dogmatic. And here I want to be a bit more specific, which is that if you look at most statements made by the development community after the Arab Spring, it was essentially an Orwellian argument saying state bad, markets good. And in the case of Egypt, everybody who knows anything about Egypt knows that instead of enabling the new elites, trying to say we ought to privatize is essentially a way of moving from public monopolies to private monopolies that tend to be even more predatory than the state. So, and again, I exclude the World Bank from this logic, but my question is whether you basically agree with what I'm saying without, again, doing harm to any of your sister organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I can do. Okay, fine. Let me answer this question first. So, to the best of my abilities. So the Deauville Partnership was a very ambitious plan by both the G8 as well as the 4 of the 6 GCC countries, Bahrain and Oman not being as wealthy as, to support the transition countries. And there are many great hopes about it. It's implemented with all the regional development banks, so Islamic Bank, Arab Fund, OFID, the OPIC Fund, as well as the African Development Bank, EIP and EBID, and ourselves. And it is a partnership, and I'm sure there's different views. We have been very proud to establish the Islamic Finance Unit. We've done transactions on Islamic finance, both on our IFC, on the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, as well as in the public. And on the issue of state bad, private good, and the more dogmatic approach, I can't speak for whatever organization you were speaking to. I can say this, that we know that it will take a mix of public and private for success to come about. We also know that bloated public budgets are dragged down by inefficient state-owned enterprises. And we know that either they can be made more efficient on the state side or on the private side, but we know that efficiency is greatly lacking. And so there's definitely some reform to be done in this. We are not evangelical, if that's the right word, about this issue at all to the country. I think we feel that we know what the state can do, the state can regulate, the state can facilitate, but it's probably not the most smart to have the state in the business of producing chickens and you know, raising whatever it is that we know that some state machineries are doing. And so probably this could be better done by the private sector. And so I think we take quite a pragmatic view. But I will say this, that the point around having a conversation on the economy is critical. Because in many of the Arab Spring countries, there is a sense that the state shall provide, the state must. And obviously the state can't without going into deeper debt. And so having a conversation of what is possible, what may need maybe to be done down the road, what is the greatest priority, and having that in the open is good. Tunisia has decided to do the people's budget, which will, usually when you get the budget, it's incomprehensible, but it's a very, very simple budget. And meanwhile, accountability organizations in Tunisia has now decided this is Al-Bawsala, those of you who know, Amina Ahyawi, group that are now pushing very hard exactly on accountability on the budget side. So hopefully we'll get further.
Actually, in the interest of time, we're just going to take the screen.
Okay, there you go. She's the boss.
The request would be if you could just ask your question and perhaps Dr. Andersen could just consolidate.
Sure, can do.
Hi, my name is Shiri. I'm from University of Haifa, Israel. My question is about the recent water agreement. According to the media, it's not clear who is going to finance this project. So now I have the chance to ask you directly.
There you go.
Who is responsible to finance this very, very important project? Thank you.
Thank you, Shiri.
Hello, I'm Malaha Sharifi. I'm originally from Afghanistan and I'm here from Mount Holyoke. Recently I was in a conference, Peace Building in Post-Conflict Societies. And in the conference we discussed the intervention of international communities and donors such as World Bank and IMF in countries like Afghanistan and how it has made the countries aid dependent. And one of the conclusion was in the conference that international communities and organizations, other donors such as the World Bank, IMF, and UN, they do not coordinate with the government. And that's why there has been a dependency on aid when it's going to the countries. It's not coordinated with the government, and the organizations are not coordinating between themselves. So my question is that, do you think there's a lesson learned from Afghanistan, where now it's an aid-dependent country, and will in the future there will be a coordination between international organizations, donors, and the government? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bruna Gaspar, and I'm part of the EPIIC Colloquium. I very much appreciated the parallel you made between political awakening and economic awakening. And I was hoping you could give some examples of early signs we should keep an eye out for of the political awakening happening in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start with Sherry's question on who will finance this. So just to let you know that it's sort of a complex tripartite deal that essentially would build a desal plant in Aqaba just outside Aqaba in Jordan, but it would be co-invested between Israel and the Jordanians, and it would allow for water to be shared on a percentage basis between the two parties. The brine from this desal would be put into the Dead Sea to test for a much bigger project that could eventually be done to deal with the Dead Sea is dropping its sea level a meter per year. And then there will be a water exchange from Lake Tiberias to the Palestinians, from the Israeli to the Palestinians again under this agreement. So everyone ends up getting the water where they need it. The Israelis and the Jordanians need it in the south, the Palestinians need it in the north, and so that's how this deal is done. And so as for financing, obviously this is quite a big project that will take that will take a mixture of public and private financing. And so desal is normally done by the private sector, and the governments buy, as you see in Israel, and then the government sort of state type 49% type operation. And so we expect that the desal plant itself will probably be private sector owned. The pipe, if you like, that would take the brine to the Dead Sea would have to be done on another basis, but probably with a significant amount of grant as well as maybe some financing. My job and the job of our director for infrastructure, who's sitting right there, Dr. Jenna, is now to ring doorbells and to see that we can get donors inside this. And I'm quite confident that we will get a structured finance package. So the answer is, I don't have the answer, but we're working on it. And that's often how it is when you sign complex agreements like this. There's nothing new about this. And it usually takes, the political lays the basis that you then can crowd in the financiers, but the financiers are not going to come until we have the political. Alaha, I think it was, asked about 8 dependencies, drawing from the Afghanistan example. I think that it's fair when you have a country such as Afghanistan, and I don't know Afghanistan because I work on the Middle East and North Africa, but it's probably fair to say that clearly, and where you have probably a government that is struggling under capacity issues and institutional weaknesses issues, that the might of the aid providers can seem overwhelming to the aid receivers and to the public eye. And that's, I'm sure, not knowing Afghanistan, I could imagine this being so. I worked for a long time in Africa where we saw this. And so coordination becomes critical. I can tell you that in the Arab world, it's very, very different. You have quite strong government institutions, and they, of course, coordinate. And in fact, some of the aid organizations that were, for example, coming into Jordan were saying, okay, well, let's create a coordination group. And I said, no. Jordan has a very strong Ministry of Planning. That's where coordination belongs. And, you don't want to establish something in parallel. They are in charge. With respect to the BANKS program, it's implemented by the government itself. We never implement our own projects and programs. So it is implemented by the Ministry of X, by the municipality of Y. They handle the money, they do the procurement, and they do everything. So I think our program is certainly very much aligned. I'm sure there's more work that can be done in some countries with respect to inter-agency coordination, though. And from Una Gaspar, on the political and economic awakening, some examples, what can I say? On the political side, I think just on the political awakening, clearly, we've seen it on every street and on every, CSO and in every place across the region, across every dinner table conversation often. The question is translating that into wholesome constitutions that anchors the rights of the people. I had a meeting when I was in Yemen with the committee, one of the committees that were preparing one piece of the constitution, and I can tell you they were politically awakened. So there's definitely a sense of politics. In Tunisia now, I met with some activists who had lobbied very hard for specific pieces inside, again, the constitution. They were also very awake. The issue is around the economic awakening, and that I think it's trailing, and it's trailing because people tend to gravitate towards the political. And that's where, frankly, there is now a job to do. How many people understand what it does, how you run a budget, what is it that is appropriate to have on the government budget and what's appropriate to have on the private sector budget, and how much can the government actually carry, and how do you drive jobs? Is it by adding another 100,000 jobs to the government civil service roster for people sitting twiddling their thumbs, or is it by creating a vibrant economy? These are the kind of conversations that need now to take place, and so there is actually a job to do for economic awakening. Let me stop here because I know you have a long day ahead. So thank you very much. It's really a great honor.